Hey, this is Randy McStine, Stephen Wilson, and McStine and Minnemann, and you're watching Sonic Perspectives.
Welcome, everybody. This is Scott Medina, Sonic Perspectives. Look who we've got today. We talked to Stephen Wilson last week, and now we're just continuing. We're just keep on rolling here. We got Randy McStine here. Randy, great to see you.
Yeah, you too, Scott. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been a little while. We've been chatting online, but I haven't actually seen you for a while. So
Yeah. How you been?
yeah, been doing really well. Yeah, thanks. And you've been really busy, huh?
Yeah, and getting busier by the minute.
Yeah. So where are we here? Is that are you in a studio in your house right now?
Yeah, this is my home studio space, which is basement room. And yeah, got well, you can't see much of it in the frame, but yeah, it's cozy down here.
Sweet. So is this where you pretty much record most of your parts, whether it's on Steven's album or your own or uh, with with McStine?
Yeah, for about
With minimum, I should say.
yeah. For about the last coming up on 2.5 years, I've been in this space. Yeah, long story short, post-COVID, my wife and I, her parents retired and they were selling, and we decided to buy their house. So I have a lot of history in this space. You know, my father-in-law used to work down here from home for IBM, and
Oh,
now it's my studio space. So I've been hanging out here for almost 20 years, which is insane. Um, but it's been a real trip to turn it into my studio. Once everything was moved out and I actually saw, what the room was, in its bare form,
mhm.
just kind of started working on it piece by piece. And, the first thing I did in here was actually prepping for the first Porcupine Tree run. I was just up here for months, in solitude, in secrecy,
Yeah.
working out, you know, um, songs for what would be our first rehearsals together before they announced the band and everything in April or May of 2022. I can't believe it's been that long, but it has
I know.
now.
I know. Yeah, I can still remember the day that announcement was made.
Yeah, we were having coffee, I think.
Yeah, you were really good. I just let everyone know. I mean, we had a full talk about the unreleased Porcupine Tree album, and you didn't let on that you were in the band.
Yeah,
I
well,
didn't find out till later on the cruise. That was very impressive.
yeah,
So this man knows how to keep his secrets. That's good. Um,
sure.
so today we're going to, God, we got so much to cover. So anyone who's tuning in, maybe a lot of folks are just got the new Stephen Wilson album, so they're interested in about that. But I really want to, also dip back to the solo album you released last fall, Mutual Hallucinations. And then upcoming next month, we've got a new Eminem album coming out.
Yes.
I don't know. Do you refer to it as Eminem, or does that give people the wrong idea of white rap stars?
Right. I mean I refer to it for short, but I think, we're not we don't have enough of a brand recognition at the moment to go without calling it McStine and Minnemann. So
Yeah.
it's probably best to keep it there.
All right, gotcha. So, so for all our viewers, hang on tight because we got a lot of ground to cover. And I think since it's just been released, let's start with the overview
Sure.
and get dig into that. Since it just seems like it's up right now, people are probably listening to it and hearing you, wondering what's Steven, and
Sure.
various things. So, maybe let's start off with asking, like, at this point, what I'm just curious, what's the vibe like in the relationship between the two of you? Like, is it like a musician peer-to-peer experience for you, or is it more of a sense of you being, a protege who's learning from the life experience since Stephen's been in it so many more decades? Or has it shifted and been different things at different times?
Well, I would say if it's the latter, the protege angle, that's unspoken, I certainly feel as though, working with him these past couple of years, you know, it's certainly it's a master class for me, in terms of production, arranging, just learning about music. But I think the bigger thing is that, it's a very it's become a very personal relationship beyond just like a typical, um, sideman employer employee kind of thing.
Nice.
We text all the time about anything that music related. We both have very warped senses of humor. So it's good. It's really, you know, it's really grown a lot from the initial, meeting, which we hadn't officially met each other until our very first rehearsal with Porcupine Tree, April of 2022. I mean, he was going off of reputation, that he had heard of me, based on Gavin's recommendation and whoever else might have mentioned him to me, or mentioned me to him rather. Um, but I think honestly, from the time we did the summer Porcupine Tree run in 2023 all the way up to now, there was a major shift in just spending more time, and being a little bit more personal, which I think, you know, led directly to the process of the overview, and it's just been kind of a natural progression of things.
Do you think initially when he, decided to give you the offer for the touring of Porcupine Tree, I know that, Gavin had gone to bat for you and really introduced to, but do you think he like looked you up and checked out and, oh, he's played with Marco, he's played with Adam, he played with, Jane Gedder and all these other people that he knows. Do you think that helped to see that you're working pretty much in his community already?
I would have to think so. Again, these aren't things I never flat out asked him, if he looked up anything or if he heard any of the records with Marco. But I think, you know, um, from a status point of view, it that is definitely a way to kind of cut through some noise if you can kind of recognize that somebody that you're about to work with is already currently working with, 10 other people that you've either worked with in the past or are currently working with. He was kind of like the last piece, really. I mean, I've like worked with everybody else in both bands except for him. So it's kind of, and Richard, I hadn't worked with Richard before, but
Yeah.
but essentially, that's kind of just it just naturally moved in that direction.
It's
So,
so funny. Yeah, you worked your way up. I mean, almost
well,
like,
you make it sound maniacal or something, like it was like some, master plan, but it's life. Life doesn't really work out that way. It's
right.
the whole, life is what happens when you're making plans situation, and kind of in a similar way with Marco, which, not to, jump off to another topic. I met him through Dave Kersner. It's not how I would have expected to meet Marco. And although I was a fan of Marco's playing before that, he was not somebody that was on my radar to necessarily work with. I never envisioned working with Marco. Is We
Hmm.
were put in a situation where we worked together and then discovered that we had, this. So in a way, I kind of view that similar with Steven. I've had this sense for a long time that we would have a lot in common. And but I didn't know how that relationship would manifest, if it would at all, and then it did, and then it's exceeded, what I would have thought possible.
Yeah, it did. And so after, the PT tour was done, he came out with a new solo album, the Harmony Codex, and you weren't on it. And
Right.
I remember messaging you at the time saying, hope you're on the next one. And sure enough,
Right.
I mean, it turned out, do you think that was because he had already recorded a lot of that or planned out who he wanted on that solo album at that point? And so there wasn't even an opening for you? Or why do you think, for the overview, why do you think he's come around to like primarily you're the main guest guitarist?
Well, I'll take the first question first. So with the Harmony Codex, I actually remember specifically when we were rehearsing for so we did our week of rehearsals in secret, to kind of test the waters and see how things were going to be. Everything was great. Then the proper tour rehearsals, kicked off again months later, right, going into the tour. And Nate Navarro played on a couple tracks for the Harmony Codex
That's right. Yeah.
in between. And I remember Steven kind of saying to me, like, oh yeah, not a lot of room on this one for guitars. I think he had already really he was almost done with that album. And I think it should be said, and this will lead into the overview, is that I don't think he yet had a real context for me beyond the rehearsal room. Obviously what we were doing was working well, for the music and for the band, but having not logged the miles yet, it's much different when you're learning material. I was talking to somebody about this once, and you know, if you get a really good musician, and anybody can learn the songs, but it's a different thing when you get into the creative realm. Not everybody has something to say, frankly, or what they might do with their own creative time might not really jibe with somebody else. So, it long story short would have been unknown to him then anyways. But you get to the overview. Now we've done a lot of things together, and well, in the live sector, but we've also talked about a lot of music. We've had deeper conversations about things. He's got more of a sense of where I'm coming from musically, to where I think it makes the initial request to try using me on something more of more of a reality, if you will. And then from that moment on, now we're in a new sector of, okay, now that this is a creative realm, this is a blank, semi-blank canvas. What are you going to do? And to me, that was the challenge. Um, if not spoken to myself, I felt like the first time I was asked to contribute to a new piece of original music, I thought, okay, put on your own producer hat and really treat this. Don't treat this like a guitar player. Treat this like this is your own record, and get to work thinking about what you would do in all of these spaces, because at that point there was a lot of space, beyond just, okay, play a guitar solo here or whatever, and that whole conversation, but like, swaths of not a whole lot going on. And I think, all right, let's try some vocal harmonies. Let's try some sound design stuff. I mean, how else would I have played a keyboard solo on a Steven Wilson record? There's Why is he going to ask me to play a keyboard solo? You know what I mean? These are things that with no direction, basically took upon myself to say, like, I think this is cool. I think this will work. And that then becomes the back and forth of like the fun of sending a massive amount of ideas his way. And now he's getting them and saying, like, oh, this is way beyond the call of duty, so to speak. I thought maybe you were just going to play guitar solo or whatever. Like, you're really getting into
Hmm.
the very minute details. And I think once I did that was kind of a, not to toot my own horn, but I think that was a game changer in terms of the understanding of maybe the depth of where I was coming from
Hmm.
musically, beyond just, again, just being a guitar player. Um, because as somebody who's listened to my records, that I have a whole process of my own. And I don't think he was necessarily aware of that until it was run through, the filter of his own music in progress.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. So, I mean, I assume if you're putting in all these ideas because he's given you all this space, and let's say space in all sense of the word, right? It's a
Yeah, right,
album.
exactly.
Um, But he's giving you this all this space that you could fill or not, and so you're taking liberties and trying new things out. I mean, I've got to assume that some of that fell on the cutting room floor, and he chose not to use some things, but chose to use other things. Like, do you have a sense of like a percentage sense of like how much you think he kept of ideas that you had and you sent out to him, just to give us an idea of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, yeah. I think like 80 to 90%.
Excellent. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the other thing that worth mentioning, and I know you guys talked about this, I think, um, there was music that came and went, like whole sections that were there one day and then just completely gone. So, I mean, he has his own very vigorous process for himself of what is essential to him, or after a week or two, he might be sitting there listening and being like, no, I don't need this. So, he's very hard on himself in terms of what stays and what goes. And I remember specifically at one point talking about the ideas that I was putting forward, and there was this understanding that as long as he had context for why I was putting these parts forward, that's really what mattered to me the most. It was like often like, yeah, you're totally in the ball, you're in the ballpark. It's just there's too much going on here already, or that section is gonna go. So honestly, most of what I put forward ended up making the cut.
Wow, fantastic. And I mean, this might be a little presumptuous to ask or even suggest, but would when does it get to the point and what your contributions are that you would think you could get a songwriting credit for it? I mean, how that's always fascinated me in
Mm.
albums, just where people will say, "Oh yeah, John Anderson wrote this piece," but it's like, but so you don't credit Rick Wakeman for that entire part that he came up with that is just iconic for the song. So, like, how does that work in a situation like this?
Well, that's a tricky one. Honestly, uh I never expected any sort of song credit or anything like that. So we'll just, push that aside right away.
Yeah,
No, melodically, I mean, it's all his stuff. The most you could maybe argue of getting into that territory is just contributing, little tags or certain things that would add to a section or tie things together. But it's not as though I came up with some main iconic riff or something that's within the music. A lot of times, he'd send an updated version of where he was at, say with Objects Outlive Us or something. And now we went from 5 minutes, now we're up to 13 minutes. And here's today's work. So then I would sit with the new stuff. And then if there's new vocals on it, okay, now I'm adding vocal harmonies, or, there's this one riff section in that song where halfway through the repetition of it, this like harmony guitar part comes in. We had been talking about new wave of British heavy metal bands like Diamond Head and early Iron Maiden, stuff like that. So I was like, oh, I think that could work, you know? It's like, great, we've got our new wave of British heavy metal moment. Like, so stuff like that would just kind of organically unfold. And again, these are just musical suggestions that I'm making in the moment to say like, that's what I hear, take it or leave it. And it would be fun for me to sort of then get like an updated version and then hear those parts mixed in, and sometimes very prominently so.
yeah,
Same thing with vocal harmonies. I mean, there are a lot of harmonies that were already sort of predetermined where it's just like, okay, just double my parts so that we have this really big, choir. But then there are other ones that were lone vocals that I said, let me try a second harmony here or a third, there's this kind of like almost like Everly Brothers moment on this one line in Objects. I think it's and now in her old wedding bed, a lady will dream her husband is dead. That
hmm
harmony didn't exist. It was just a lone thing. And I was like, I think this could really work. And again, take it or leave it. He kept it. So I mean that's me singing the upper vocal harmony. And
Okay,
I think
nice.
our voices just blend in a way that, I don't think people, you'd know my voice to know that it's me.
Right.
And I'm not saying all this to, try to pat myself on the back. It's just to give uh, more perspective on the way the sounds work together. We were able to sort of tap into a sort of similar stream of reference and, you know, very easily kind of build these things.
Yeah, both of you obviously do blend well enough together. I mean, I can think of the line you're talking about. I didn't realize that was you. I've just figured he overdubbed that.
Yeah.
So that's really cool, and that comes off handy in the concert hall as well when you're
Yeah.
singing his high parts.
Right.
Yeah. Um, okay, so of course, a lot's already been made about your guitar solo on No Ghost on the Moor. So tell us about your experience of building that solo and how that came to be.
Yeah. So, if you've been watching when you interviewed him, this thing about trying to reinvent the classic rock guitar solo. I think, first of all, from a reading comprehension perspective, um, I don't I don't view it as, of course we're not going to reinvent the classic rock guitar solo. It is what it is. But the idea is we know what will typically happen with this kind of space and these type of sounds. Let's try to get away from that and do something else. And the minute you try to take away the sort of bluesy Gilmore thing, which is where it totally wants to go, then you get into the realm of let's start by trying to find a sound that we like. So, you know, my first approach was to kind of revisit in the vicinity of what I did with Porcupine Tree when we would do I Drive the Hearse live, because that out of all the guitar solos that I played in that show, that was the one that I would say was the most me. It was really like just using that space to do something that I thought would work really well and that was very different from what was there before. All the other guitar solos in the show, I tried to keep them either very close to what Steven did or Alex Lifeson or whoever. Um, but that one was like this very soulful slide kind of haunting quality to it. So we kind of started there, and it was nice, but not, particularly as dramatic and interesting as he envisioned. So we just kind of tried a couple of different things, and then I kind of got it in my head of this more Robert Fripp kind of direction, that kind of really fuzzed out early Fripp tone, but then also spiritually thinking of something like the last movement of A Love Supreme, where John Coltrane's just playing these really beautiful, slow, heart-wrenching kind of melodies. Not the blazing stuff that he does. It's just really
Right.
beautiful melodies. Because I felt like the backing music, the context, really has this soaring quality to it. It needs something to kind of elevate it, but without it being like an 80s rock guitar solo. So I kind of had the sound in my head first, got the chain set up, and just kind of went for it. And I knew while I was playing it, I was like, I think this is where it should be. I felt very free. It didn't feel, even though I'm mentioning these references to you, it didn't feel calculated to me playing. There was like no, I didn't have to try, if that makes any sort of sense. It just kind of seemed to have this flow to it.
Hmm.
And the sound was making me play a certain way. And I had a feeling like, okay, I think that this is where it should go. And I tried a couple variations of the same thing, basically. And he loved it. So that's what we went with. I would say it's like to me, it's like it's part Fripp, it's part Coltrane, and it's also, oddly enough, it's influenced by like vocalists like Elizabeth Fraser from the Cocktail Twins. The passage reminded me a little bit of the Blue Nile Hats, which is like one of my favorite records.
Hmm.
So I was thinking about the singer of the Blue Nile, just like trying to find these really nice melodic passages that would just kind of sustain and kind of soar through the air, and when the drums drop out and everything, it's just free time, and it's just a one take sort of expression there, and I felt something while I was doing it, and then when I would hear it back mixed into the track, I really felt like, man, this is really a significant moment I've been giving here. I mean, it's like 4 minutes to say something. So there it
Right.
is.
Wow. Yeah, incredible. Do you think at the outset, I mean, he planned to have a overarching guitar solo. Like he didn't have to create that much space, right? But
Right.
but he originally told you, look, I've kept the palette open here for the canvas open for you to,
Yeah.
draw on it as you wish, and then
Yeah.
played with it. Yeah. And that first one, the first pass you did with I Drive the Hearse, more approach for it. That's probably the version that's on the one of his more bonus expanded albums. I think he said there's another one they included on there.
I'm guessing that's probably the one. I think, by the time we got to the one that's on the record, there was either two or three approaches before then, and then that.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. And right before that, in the movement, before that section, there's also an explosive guitar solo section from there that, is rapid fire. And you probably had a whole lot of different ideas and influences coming in, it sounds like. I like it like the last run that you do at the very end. Suddenly it feels like you go into a different scale or mode
Mm,
that I really enjoyed.
cool. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, the basic direction there was to, kind of late 60s, early 70s McLaughlin, kind of, just really nasty sound and with some spring reverb and some distortion and this kind of frenetic, you know, uh, kind of free sounding thing, which is not really a style that I, necessarily play a lot of, but again, because we share that vocabulary in terms of the things that we like, give me a reference point and I'll kind of sit there and say like, yeah, yeah, how it's not about trying to copy the reference or emulate the reference. The reference is just meant to, in my mind, put you into a zone of kind of thinking about the context of how that type of player might approach it, because the last thing I want to do is get into a zone of like parody or something. In the end, it should still feel like it's me doing it, but it's informed by this idea of if I was this person or if I was this set of people, I might be thinking in this zone.
Gotcha. Yeah. So soon you'll be preparing to go out on tour with Steven again, this time with a solo band rather than with the Porcupine Tree. And, these are all guys you know well and have played
Yeah.
with. Um, but is there any way that you need to prepare that is different for this band than when you're going out with Porcupine Tree? Any different kind of headspace you have to approach this from?
I think so. With Porcupine Tree, I was obviously, uh, you know, trying to be very respectful of the past. And I was a fan as a teenager. I saw the post 2000, post In Absentia lineup on stage, I don't know, probably 10 times or something. And so I understood what that role was, and I wanted to do right by the source material, honor what Wes did in that band, all that stuff. And I, to a degree, I feel like I handled it with kid gloves. I wanted to put my own stamp on it, but really keep it locked into the realm of what that is. Here, I'm in a situation where, you know, there's been at least a half dozen guitar players who have been in the band live, if I have my number correct. But then you've also got players on record who have also contributed really unique things who haven't played live. So, and then you add Steven into the mix, and before you know, you kind of you put all this material together, and you've got like 10 different guitar players who have had some stamp on the stuff, and some more than others. And of course, Guthrie, there's just no way around the fact that he to me he's a one of one kind of player, and the work that he did on those two records is monumental. Um, so there's a physical preparation, but I'm not afraid to say that the mental preparation is more of kind of understanding why I'm here in this position. And to be frank, it's not to be Guthrie, it's to be me. So, the fact that I've played on this new record and I have contributed to an original work makes it very different than just, stepping into a quote unquote sideman role where you're just trying to, replicate parts that have already been done. I've now created parts that are a part of this music. So I have that part, and then obviously I've got to service, all of the other material that I didn't play on. And what's been fascinating to me is to converse with Stephen about this and to keep having this come up of be yourself. Just you don't have to be those other guys, you know? And that's something I have to remember, which is to not go to every subreddit forum where everybody's going to be saying, why isn't he playing the solo like such and such? Well, that's because the guy who wants me in the band has given me the full, basically within reason, of course. I'm not saying I'm not going to be respectful to what came before, but the point is I'm being given the license to be myself and to not feel the pressure of trying to be Guthrie or anybody else who's come before me. All brilliant players. Learning this stuff, it just deepens my respect for everybody else who has been in this position. But I've been around the block a few times, and I'm my own player. So it's I almost have to look in the mirror and do the Stuart Smalley. I'm good enough, and you know that whole thing because it's tricky. You want to do right by the artist, you want to do right by the fans, but I serve the artist, and the artist knows what I do. In some ways, it almost seems like better than I know myself. Uh, so it's cool. It's been an interesting process to sort of like recognize what's there and then to try to, be myself in the music.
And let's face it, I mean, Steven isn't the kind of person who wants to just have things, be like a museum piece from the past. He's a creative artist who always wants to be trying new things. And so I wouldn't expect that he would want you to just follow the exact riffs and
Yeah,
licks from the past, but, create something new. That's what he's doing with the album as well.
I feel more like an Adrian Belew kind of character in the situation, which was not to give the impression that, I'm going to be radically altering everything, but I think about Adrian's I'm a huge fan, his arc of like when he's playing with David Bowie, he's stepping into a period of Bowie's music where, just 5 years ago he was Ziggy Stardust and now he's doing, he's in his Berlin phase. And they're doing some of that old stuff, but he doesn't have to sound like Mick Ronson. He's going to be Adrian Belew. So I think it's a lot different, joining Steven's band in 2016 than it is in 2025. There's a lot more music that has happened since the heyday of the Raven Hand Cannot Erase band, and he's taken this music in so many different directions that in a lot of ways some of those stylings don't necessarily apply anymore. They do apply to the source material, but that style of playing has very little to do with stuff like the harmony codex or the future bytes and that kind of stuff. So, I'm kind of having to bring all of these worlds together and sing a lot on top of it, which is something that nobody uh has, typically had such a big role in doing as a guitar player in the solo band. So
Right, right. Yeah, and we talked about this aspect a little when I interviewed you when you were out touring with Porcupine Tree, but let's just revisit it again in this context. So, when you're playing material from the Harmony Codex and the Future Bites that have never been played live before, so you don't have any reference point of previous guitarists, and playing live. So, when you come into the rehearsal studio with Steven, does he give you an outline of anything ahead of time of like, how he wants you to play in a live arrangement of the song, like guitar parts or
right.
harmonies to sing? Or does he not give you anything and then you have to arrive just knowing the piece inside out and see what develops in real time?
No, we have a pretty good system going in terms of, because they're especially those, well, I can't give away the stuff that we're playing, but if there's stuff that's been played in the past, there's a live reference point for how the band already plays it, and then it's just a matter of picking, one of those reference points to sort of play along to. But with the stuff that like with the new record or other things that you may or may not be in the set, yeah, there is some designation, of him going through the multi tracks and kind of picking out parts for us that because we got to know what we're doing. There's a lot, there's a lot of stuff to sift through. I mean, just the sound programming alone is so much of this gig, let alone the playing and singing. So yeah, it is pretty well sort of planned out in terms of at least initially having a sense of what everybody's going to do. Now, when we get into the rehearsal room, you know, adjustments may be made from there, but nobody will be showing up really with this kind of mystery of like what should I do? There just isn't that kind of time to, waffle around with that.
Right.
But obviously you leave room open for the possibilities that something cool might happen that then becomes, part of the equation.
Since there are so many keyboards on the last two albums, are you going to do any keys as well, or are you just going to be on guitar?
I'll just be on guitar. And yeah, and just again, a lot of the sound design stuff. There's a lot of opportunities for, unconventional guitar sounds and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, sweet. Well, anyone who's watching who just knows Randy through his involvement now at Porcupine Tree and Steven Wilson, I really encourage you to check out his other body of work from before this because there's just great material. And what I just want to touch on a little bit right now is this excellent album you released, Mutual Hallucinations, came out last November. Actually, Steven Wilson mixes some of the songs on there, so he's involved, has a hand in it as well. Um, but just want to ask you a few questions about
yeah,
that. But like when we're looking at it, you've got that, and then you've got these three albums you've done with Marco together. So I'm just curious, just to start, give us the broad strokes, how you choose which of your material is going to go to which project. Because like a song like Send Your Light, which is on your solo album, but Marco plays drums on it. Uh,
right.
in your mind, could that have been on either album, or how do you decide which goes to the albums with Marco?
Yeah, so yeah, in the case of that song, that is kind of a wishy-washy one because, I was doing that in my solo set in 2019. And when I got off the road opening for the Pineapple Thief, that was one of the first songs that I wanted to work on a full arrangement for, beyond just the solo. And we were finishing up the first McStine and Minnemann record, but we had this very open back and forth of like if he had a song that he was working on for a solo project, can you sing on this? Yeah, yeah, sure. And vice versa. Can you play drums on this? That song could have definitely been on the McStine and Minnemann record. But since I wrote it and the way it started was more so just, can you play drums on this? When I was kind of building the track list for my solo record, I felt like sonically it matched some of the other things that I had going in the record, and it also I kind of needed a more of a rocker, and I thought like, okay, this that would actually work really well, to kind of tie between some of this more ethereal stuff. So yeah, I basically ended up just taking it for my solo record and going with that. But other than that, I mean, typically I'm thinking of our project if I'm writing in that direction, which is it is hard to say. Like sometimes I don't really know where something is going to end up. But I figure if I go down the road of getting him involved, it will then feel more like us. So therefore, it'll probably become McStine and Minnemann versus, one of my own solo tracks. The song Remains as well, which closes the record. Marco played drums on, and he actually played a little guitar figure in the beginning. He plays glockenspiel in the bridge. There was a time where I also could have said like that could have been a song for us, but I always felt a little squeamish about that one because it just felt so far out of the realm of the kind of stuff that we had been doing. I could spin it and say like, oh, that's exactly why we should put it on our record because it's so radically different. Um, but again, it seemed to fit the sort of palette of my solo record that I've been kind of building towards. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I got it. There's this just gorgeous 9 minute piece that's kind of the centerpiece of the album, Economy of Differences, and it really shows off the strength and versatility of your voice.
Mm.
So I'm wondering, at times, do you look to specifically write a song where you can get more emotive with your voice rather than, what a rock song might allow for?
Yeah, I was definitely on a mission with that one. I'd found this guitar sound that I thought was really cool, and I wrote it as like a solo guitar vocal piece first, and then all the other kind of electronic elements and keyboard elements came later, mostly from Adam Holtzman.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think I realized with that one that I wanted to. It's not that I set out to make like a sort of vocal showcase, but as I was writing it and I was reaching for certain melodies, uh, I realized that I wanted to try to have a piece that was like almost like a classic vocal, that like a singer would sing. And I
Yeah.
and I and I know that probably sounds odd, but it really gets to the psychology of the fact that I've very rarely viewed myself as a singer. I've always sort of viewed myself as a guitar player who sings.
Hmm.
And it's really just been in the last couple of years, kind of starting with that solo tour in 2019, where I started to kind of uh, lean into my voice a little bit more and kind of appreciate the instrument that it is and kind of work with it and kind of, own it basically. And doing that tour and then doing the records with Marco and my solo record, I feel like you can kind of chart this progression of me being a little bit more expressive and experimental and all these different things with my voice, to where, a song like Economy of Differences wouldn't have happened a few years ago. I kind
Hmm.
of had to grow into uh, those emotions, and a lot of it, yes, it's technique, but a lot of it is really from in here, just kind of like opening up uh, that side of things, which, you know, up until a few years ago, just a lot more guarded. I just know people who were just born to sing, and I never really felt that way because it came later for me. And it was almost more of a function than like a calling, if you will.
Yeah.
But now I feel much more like like a singer. Like I feel like I don't feel embarrassed to say like, yeah, I'm a singer, damn it, you know?
Well, how does it land for you that, I mean, I think of all of the cameos you've made on different people's albums in the last several years, majority of them are for your voice, not for your guitar playing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so how does that sit with you based on what you just said?
Well, that's kind of I don't want to say the proof, but that has definitely been sort of eye-opening to me as well, which is to to be recognized as a singer is just not something that I really pictured in my sort of musical journey. You know, if I think about when I started and how I started and why and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I'm flattered by that, and I think having those experiences, where yes, people want you to sing their songs and to hear them nicely mixed and all this kind of stuff, you know, the voice put on a pedestal, so to speak, is definitely, you know, it's very affirming, you know, and interesting to kind of realize that I'm building a sort of discography as a singer, that I which is really just a side, you know, it's a sidebar to what I always thought was my sort of main bread and butter, so to speak. But it's this different thing, and so I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, how about that? Pretty cool.
Yeah,
Well, flipping to the other side of things, you've got a few instrumentals on the album, and I love them all.
thank you.
But the scroll, I mean, that's really something else. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
were you drawing from specific inspirations for this one? Because it's like it just seems like it's a Prague tour de force.
Yeah, well, it's a little tongue in cheek. I mean, the idea of the scroll, I sort of think of it as, you know, being like an audio social media feed, you know, where basically like every section, it sort of like is its own world for about 15 to 20 seconds, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. But for these very quick sort of dopamine hits of like, oh, we're kind of in this ethereal space now, and now we're in like kind of metal territory, and now we're kind of in this, you know, pop realm. Um, so it's to me, it's like an audio version of the sort of crazy, you know, this that we all do every day. Um, but yeah, that's just one of those things of like a you take a seed of an idea and you just kind of see where it goes, and that was really fun to put together, because like I said, each kind of mini movement just kind of enters its own zone, and I got to play fretless bass and just like try all sorts of things, you know, that were really fun to do.
Well, this is a good point to ask you about drummers. So, for people who don't know, it's like Randy's played with like the who's who of Prague drummers. It's just insane. And you bring in so many different ones, even on this album. There's several different ones. So, for the scroll, you chose Nick DiVirgilio. So, what is your mindset? Is it do you say, well, this piece is for this drummer, or is it availability? Like on the scroll, I could totally see Marco just like killing that song. So,
Sure.
so I'm curious how you decided to pick Nick for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, usually it is totally just from a musical standpoint. And you're right. I mean, I'm like the luckiest guy, you know, in terms of the people that I've gotten to play with and who I could ask to do things. And it's tough because each one of them would be great. Um, but when you've played with somebody for a really long time, you kind of really drill into the specifics, so you kind of really know how you think they'll sound on a piece. And I just felt like Nick was the guy for that. You know, it's got it it has, you know, everything that he does in so many ways. And he's also, you know, full of surprises as well. But you know, it's got this big sort of, you know, Genesis section where it's kind of very Hackett, and you know, and he's like
Yeah.
the perfect guy for that alone. But no, I mean, I love Nick's playing, and he's the guy that I out of everybody that I've, you know, made music with the longest since I've been kind of, you know, brought into this progressive rock world, so to speak. So any opportunity to work with Nick is always a blast.
Yeah, I was happy to just see yesterday that he's going to play with Hackett on his fall tour.
Yeah,
Probably because Craig is probably playing with you guys at
Craig
around
will be
the
with
same
us.
time,
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
think.
Oh, and I've seen him with Steve, and it's great. Yeah,
Yeah, it's going to be a thrill for him, I'm sure. And that's when they're coming to Boulder, so I'm really happy I'll get to see him on that one
yeah,
too. Um, so as I mentioned before, you've got both Stephen Wilson and Tim Palmer taking turns in mixing the songs on the album.
yeah.
And so I'm curious when you, as an artist, when do you decide to bring in an outside person to either mix or master or produce versus doing it yourself? And if you do bring in someone outside, like are you using that as an educational opportunity for you? Like, are you intently watching their process? So in the future you might do it yourself, or would you do you always see the advantage of bringing in an outside person for those kind of duties?
Uh, I always see the advantage. Yes, I am always trying to learn through the process. I'm not physically there when Stephen or Tim are mixing. This is all done remotely
Right.
on their own time, and everybody's got their own process. And honestly, I think it's easier to not be there, and to let people go on their gut instincts before you start, trying to change things in the middle of an idea. There's no better idea killer than to not let somebody follow through with how they see things. And I'd rather get the truest interpretation from whoever it is before, I sleep on it for a while and then kind of get used to hearing it in a new way. And then, okay, what do I really love? What are the things that, need some tweaking? And I just, I'm getting better as a mix engineer, but I still don't have this sort of skill set that I think is frankly good enough for what I want to hear.
Mm.
I think with mutual hallucinations, it's the most sort of detailed record I've made in terms of the arrangement of sounds, like just the raw sounds that I put down. Um, in a lot of ways, I don't want to say they mix themselves, but there's so much intention behind how the sounds already work that it just needs like a really fine touch to somebody to really bring those things together and not have it all get lost. And you know, Tim, I've been working with on and off for over 10 years now, and he's amazing. He's mixed some of my favorite records ever. And I've learned about Tim that he will always surprise me, uh, not only with how he morphs things that I've already done, but the additional spices that he adds. And he's the kind of guy who will pick up a guitar and add some background sort of delay guitar thing that I'm the only person who's going to know that it's there because I didn't do it. But I hear it and I think, oh man, that's brilliant. Like it draws your ear to the vocal or to some other aspect. So he's got this bird's eye view of a piece, and I'm too in it. I've heard it 10 million times. I have nowhere else to take it. So as a mixer, I feel like I'm exhausted by the time I've handed it off to somebody, and I need to hear it back to me sort of in a fresh way. So I look forward to that. With Steven, it was interesting because he was a little bit more, reductionist. He would send something back and say like, "Hey, I muted some things. If you really want them back, obviously it's my record. I'll ask for them back." But his thing was more about getting me to realize that I feel like I would sometimes overcompensate with too many parts to where with his mixing abilities, he could take less ingredients and make a tastier dish. So that was really eye-opening to me. The first
Yeah.
one he did was a song called Adopted Son. And yeah, I mean all this extra stuff I had, it was all just layering and stuff, but he was like, you don't need any of that. Try this. And I was like, wow, he made it somehow more ethereal and more personal at the same time with by taking things away. And that's a huge lesson, you know. So I kind of from that moment on like went through the rest of the songs that he ended up mixing and started kind of going through that process myself. Like maybe this doesn't need these four guitar tracks. Maybe it just needs one and that kind of thing. So yeah, I feel like you can learn a lot um in that, you know, but in Steven's case, obviously he does it all. So um I think he's already thinking about the production as he's going along. I'm more in that zone now than I ever was, but I still really like just having somebody else put their own spin on it. And it comes down to casting. You know, you just got to hire the right people that you think are going to understand what you're going for. And those two guys obviously totally get it. So,
Yeah, I remember Stephen had that aha too, and I remember hearing like in earlier days on, in absentia and back, like he would just layer the guitars on, and at some
right.
point he learned maybe from another producer like you did that you didn't have to do that anymore, and
Yeah.
he totally changed his approach in the same way.
Yeah. You can really hear, I mean, even though his most recent work, you know, the productions are obviously very super detailed and beautiful. But a lot of times, yeah, they're technically not as layered in some cases, you know, not as many guitars, you know, it might just be a single guitar. And if I had to guess, I think he's learned a lot of that from all of the remix work that he's done. I mean,
Right.
you know, you're getting an album like Close to the Edge, arguably the greatest symphonic progressive rock album ever made. And then you pull up those tracks and you're like, hmm, that's all that's there, huh? And it's all just it's more in the arranging of the parts and the sounds and then how it's all glued together. You know, you can again really overcompensate thinking, oh, this will be so much heavier if I layer four guitars, but it actually starts to narrow the audio field. It just
Hmm.
things get too cluttered and then everything just kind of gets smaller and smaller. It's you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
anyway.
Great lessons to learn. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone go check out Mutual Hallucinations now if you haven't already. And we're going to move over to the upcoming third album from McStine and Minnemann. And three. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just coming out next month. And so like for this one, now there's two of you. You guys are both like powerhouse multi-instrumentalists with just endless supply of influences together. So, I mean, is that like being in a candy store for you when creating together?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always very fun and, you know, surprising in the best way possible to get like a new piece of music from Marco because he just has so many interesting ideas and you know, he never ceases to amaze whether it's, you know, his technical ability, but also just the way his brain works for music. You know, I got to sit with this stuff sometimes for a really long time and just say, what is going on here? You know, because you know, I might dabble myself in various forms of complexity, but I don't, I don't view myself as that kind of musician. Frankly, I just don't think that I am. I think people like Marco, they're really his brain is like functioning in some other stratosphere. And I've you know I've stood feet away from him rehearsing, you know, like for our McStine and Minnemann set on Cruise to the Edge, and just watched him, you know, do stuff. And Nick as well, who's as we were just talking about, you know, a brilliant drummer and musician. We're both kind of standing there like watching this magic trick in front of us. And it's just you can see what's happening, but it's your brain sometimes still doesn't really compute how it's possible.
That's why he's able to get that four-part interdependence, right? It's like
Exactly. Yeah.
got
Every
four different
negative.
minds working at once.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but thankfully, you know, I think the thing that a lot of people might miss with Marco and why I'm so proud of the work that we've done together is that I really think it highlights his songwriting and his like I said, the way his brain works for music. He really is a composer. He's not just a drummer. He is also a really big picture kind of guy. He loves playing guitar. He's a total guitar nerd, and and he loves like Ryuichi Sakamoto and Rai Cooder and like just all of these different things that are not, again, what one would expect, when they might just think of Marco. And I think that's what sort of drew each other in, was our interest in things that were not just the usual stuff that might be expected. So we kind of tap into these other realms, and I feel very comfortable putting forth something like Green, which is like more Beatlesque or XTC kind of uh, track, right alongside one of the crazier things that we might do. And I think that's kind of the exciting thing to me about the project is we kind of, I say that in our best moments we kind of pull each other towards this center, of taking the really muso and kind of left brain stuff, and then the emotional side, and kind of finding this sweet spot where the two coexist, because I want to sing nice songs and melodies and stuff. I don't want to be thinking the entire time that I'm doing this stuff. But getting the two to work side by side, I think that's something that we're getting better at. And I feel like our latest record is a really nice uh, mashup of the work that we've done before. I feel like it takes a lot of, it's a continuation of where we've been, but I think there's a lot of new territory that we're exploring, which is really cool.
And what's like more fun for you personally? Like, would it be like just that gonzo, like unabashed jam of crossing wires, or more of a structure of a song like in Survive or Green?
I these days definitely skew more toward the song side of things. I think you can get that other kind of craziness from a million other things, that, and people are gonna do it crazier than me. I don't really live in that kind of chop fest world so much. I think I have enough of it on tap to get the job done,
Yeah.
but it's really not where I'm coming from musically. So I like being pushed to my limits, because it'll pull stuff out of me that I didn't even know was possible, and that's always an exciting thing, to have to like really work for it.
Hmm.
Uh, but no, I think for me, the the beauty of this record was that I think that the songs are really strong and really really detailed. I really enjoyed getting into the fine details of the arrangement. And as a guitar player in this project, because like I said, Marco plays a lot of guitar, and if you look at our song credits, typically the ones that he writes, he's already played a lot of guitar on those songs. And I'm usually either just supplementing what he's done, or just, trying to come up with other zones that he hasn't already sort of gone to. I kind of view myself more as like a producer's guitar player than just like the guitar player. And again, it's kind of back to the Steven thing, like finding a sound that's interesting, or finding some kind of part. Marco will say that like, uh, he appreciates that I'll sort of, he'll have an idea and I'll like take a highlighter and I'll really put a focus on something that he's put in there and just kind of, lift it up a bit. And I feel like that's maybe one of the strengths that I bring to his songs. And then with mine, obviously his drumming is second to none, but he will also pick up a guitar, add parts, add some keyboard parts, these extra layers that I just wasn't, thinking of. And it takes the two of us to kind of make it ours.
Hmm. What inspired you to insert a brief Beatles homage into Green with, the While My Guitar Gently Weeps,
Oh,
and just the lyric the lyric piece. That's
looking through
unusual
you.
for you to give such
Yeah,
a
yeah. Yeah,
well,
I don't typically, wear it so that heavily on the sleeve. I think it's because the subject matter it was actually written about the Beatles.
oh,
Yeah, so it was during this week I had and it actually dates back to the summer of 2020, which is also where Over the Bay comes from.
hmm
It was a part of a string. I was working on like a song a day, and a couple of the pieces ended up on our second record too. And then Over the Bay, Green, and a song called Free all came from this kind of like week of just setting up really minimal acoustic guitar, vocal, some harmonies, nothing else. And then we built those tracks up. But the idea behind Green was that I had laid out some records to listen to for the week, and one of them was Rubber Soul. And I was just kind of up late one night, and I was just looking at the album cover, and I was kind of thinking about them, trying to imagine in real life them taking the photo, and like trying to think about the day. What was the day like? Where were they? All this kind of stuff. But then zooming out a bit, thinking about them as people, and because they're in this pivotal moment when they're making that record where they're about to never really play live again, and they're a couple years in, they're obviously the biggest thing in the world, but they're about to take this very experimental turn with Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sergeant Pepper. So the songs are kind of reflecting on this idea of, how aware were they of who they were, where they were going, and going way into the future, things like obviously the tragic death of John Lennon and things. There's kind of this spirit in there in that bridge, which is the kind of While My Guitar Gently Weeps homage of if you knew then what was coming, would you stop? Would you turn back, or would you just do it all over again? So it kind of just goes into this alternate universe version of While My Guitar Gently Weeps for like 5, 10 seconds, and then kind of morphs back out of it. And it's not that it was intentional, it's just that my fingers went there. It's in a different key, but it's essentially the same for a moment. And I thought, I don't think we're going to get sued. It'll be fine.
I'll indulge. Yeah.
Yeah. But the very long answer is just because that's what the song is about. Is literally about the Beatles. From me thinking about this fantasy version of this album cover. Um, so, and that's a George song, and the bridge is kind of introspective. So it, in a way, it kind of reflects the different characters of the band.
I like it. Yeah. And so in that same writing session, you did free. So where do these kind of lyrics come from? I wanted to take some acid and write all of my heartfelt ballads in a
Yeah,
language no
yeah,
one could understand. And
yeah,
thought it could be a yogi in a cave with a pet coyote.
right. Yeah, yeah, it's very it was silly kind of 60s psychedelia.
We're,
Well, it was
we're, we're continuing the Beatles LSD theme there.
yeah, well, kind of moving into like Donovan and Beach Boys territory, like kind of
Hmm.
that one definitely like a Brian Wilson smile kind of like a vignette kind of thing where again I'm I don't love the Smile record, but I'm fascinated by the the construction of what Wilson was going for, and with Van Dyke Parks,
Hmm.
and how like just all these sections are like sort of really radically different and sort of cobbled together. Sometimes it's brilliant, sometimes it doesn't quite work, but um yeah, these just kind of mini movies, so that song, and also you got to remember, like I said, summer of 2020, the height of cooped up sort of COVID mania. I think some of the weirdness is also just kind of reflected in that moment. It's almost hard to remember what it was like now, but
Yeah, let's not
from
try too hard.
yeah, exactly. But it's a sunny day outside and you're still not sure what you're supposed to be doing, and you're inside, you know, and you're thinking about, I don't know, being in a cave somewhere.
Yeah. So, other than the Steven Wilson tours, what else do you have in your sights for the rest of the year and beyond?
So there's some stuff coming up in the short term. Of course, I'm not sure when this is airing, but I've got a handful of dates with the trio playing my original music. We're going to be doing Marillion Weekend in Montreal, which is very exciting.
Nice.
I've gone up there and played twice, but I've never been up there with an electric band. So this will be very cool. Really very guitar, heavy
Is this
trio.
kind of your bluesy side of you?
Well, it'll incorporate some of the stuff from that unintentional EP I did.
Mhm.
But I'll be picking some songs from Mutual Hallucinations from my album Idol. Maybe
Right.
a lo-fi resistance song. We'll see what we have time for. But I'm very much interested in the trio format. Yeah, I mean, you're well aware of the Fringe, which was a trio with Jonas Reingold and Nick DiVirgilio. Um, I still really romanticize the rock power trio, and you know, there's a lot that can be done with that format. I think a band like The Smile is right now really showing everybody, that you can have a power trio and not rely on the same old, vocabulary. But nonetheless, we'll do a few gigs. And then that goes immediately into Cruise to the Edge. And I'll be playing with Jonas Reingold in his Car Mechanic live band. Um, and then that's max, pretty much I come home, I've got about a week, and then we start rehearsing for the Steven Wilson tour. So it's really full on from now until about mid-June. My summer is clear at the moment. I would like to probably make some headway on some new music. I have started some new solo ideas, messing around with certain, ingredients to see what might happen. But also depending on, what comes of these trio gigs, that may also really inform the next creative thing that I do. Because I'm always sort of torn between, the sort of solitary studio artist version of myself and somebody who really just kind of wants to have a band and not necessarily have I don't want to say have to do all that, but you know, there's a different form of priorities when you just have your band and you're creating with people. That's not an experience I've had a whole lot of in my career thus
Mhm.
far. I've usually either been the lone wolf or been a part of somebody else's thing, or putting together a band to, play my stuff. But um, the sort of forming a
Because you
band,
keep that's because you keep collaborating with people who are in four other bands already.
right?
Like,
Well, that's the lesson that I seem to be, not really learning, which I don't regret any of it, but I definitely I romanticize the idea of, essentially when most bands formed because they were like in proximity of each other, the guys who went to school together or, worked the same job or whatever the case may be. Um, I haven't really lived in that world so much, and I'm working with some guys now who are uh, a few years younger than me, so that's really cool, to be the old guy and people are close by. I'm working with a drummer that it takes him 10 minutes to drive to my house. So that is like in 2025, it's like, whoa. Um,
mhm.
so anyways, I'm kind of curious to see where that goes. But I have started solo music that has nothing to do with trios. And
And how about Adam Holtzman? I know you guys were kind of thinking maybe doing a collaborative project together.
hmm. Yeah, we did a live set in New York at the Bitter End. It was really cool. We kind of just picked some tunes to play, some of mine, some of his, a couple of covers. Um, yeah, that's, again, that would be something really interesting to do. Obviously, I love his playing. We're going to be seeing a lot of each other, so I
Yep.
suppose it'll be worth discussing the possibilities there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we'll see. I would love to see McStine and Minnemann on a stage again. We have a catalog now that can, hold together, I think, a really strong set.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of getting everybody together and figuring out who's the band and all of that. So it's all exciting stuff. It's just how do you move the pieces around on the chessboard.
Totally. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Randy, for walking us through all of these different avenues and different areas of your musical world. It's just fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. And good luck with what you got in front of you. And we'll see you guys out on the road later this year. And for all of our viewers, just yeah, be sure to pick up the entire McStine catalog, which will take you a little while to get through.
Yeah.
What's the best way? Should they visit Bandcamp on that, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's really the primary place to find all the things that I've done. randymcstein.bandcamp.com.
Sweet. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you learned a few new things here and enjoy the listening that you're going to get into your ears here real soon. We'll see you later.
Thanks.